And we're back talking about how governments could tighten their belts and provide you with some tax relief. We were talking about the federal level. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about the provincial level here in Canada. Kris, I want to come to you. When you think about what's happening in Western Canada, are there any positive examples of governments that are maybe just doing exactly that, tightening their belt and delivering tax relief for Canadians?
Yeah, for sure. We actually have a really good example here in Alberta, where I'm sitting. So, the government of Premier Danielle Smith has imposed major spending restrictions on itself. So, I gotta stress, both you gentlemen have been Alberta directors before. You know that we've been pushing for these sort of restraints, since the 1990s. So, they now have to, one, balance their budget. Two, any spending increases in future must be tied to the rate of inflation and population growth. So that is a big deal. And any cash
Hmm.
surpluses, half of that cash surplus must be paid down onto the debt. And the other half either has to go into savings or back onto the debt or on one time spending. So they've put some serious restrictions onto themselves here in Alberta, and it's about time. There's been many times where they've had a surplus one year because of revenue from resources, and they've blown their budget and then panicked afterwards when they still have to pay these bills. So that's a really positive thing that we're seeing here budget wise here in Alberta. Unfortunately, in British Columbia, we can't say the same thing. They're racking up their debt. They don't seem to be paying much attention at all to the risk of debt and the interest payments that people are going to have to be paying on that. In Saskatchewan, they're doing pretty well, but they really need to tackle the high cost of their fuels. And Premier Scott Moe needs to take a page out of Smith's book and cut their fuel taxes like a girl.
All right. Franco, what about Eastern Canada? Is there anything that sticks out to you in terms of things that provincial governments have done there?
New Brunswick, let's give some kudos over there. New Brunswick announced late last year some significant tax relief, income tax relief, saving a taxpayer up to $1,300. So big kudos there. And then let's also just look at the Council of Atlantic Premiers. They have launched a campaign against the federal carbon tax increase and the federal second carbon tax. And you know what's so important there is that it shows that tax relief outside of Ottawa is a nonpartisan issue, because you have the Liberal government of Newfoundland and Labrador that has cut its own provincial fuel tax and it is pushing back against Trudeau's repeated carbon tax hikes. So in Ottawa, the Trudeau Liberals, they're essentially making life more expensive, whether it's at the pumps, whether it's heating your home, or it's at the grocery store with their carbon tax hikes. And we have a multi-partisan council of Atlantic premiers that are pushing back against those increases.
Now, I haven't kept up with it, but the federal government argues that I believe they say most Canadians end up getting back more than what they pay in the tax. This would suggest there's a redistribution happening there. Is that what type of analysis have you either done or that you're aware from other groups? Is that accurate? What's happening there? What's the truth?
Well, Colin, if you think that the government can raise taxes, skim some off the top, and somehow make everyone better off with rebates, then I have some Ocean View property in Calgary to sell you. Now, of course, that can't happen. The parliamentary budget officer, the government's own independent budget watchdog, shows that Trudeau and his ministers are using magic math when it comes to the carbon tax. And in fact, the carbon tax will cost the average family this year up to $710 even after the rebates. But it gets worse, because by 2030, after Trudeau has cranked up his carbon tax and has fully implemented his second carbon tax, these two carbon taxes will cost the average family in Canada more than $2,000 annually by 2030, even after the rebates.
Okay, so let's talk about belt tightening examples, though. If you want governments to tighten their belts, Kris, what do you think should be done at the provincial level?
So they could again start with what Alberta's doing right now, and other provinces have done this in the past. I mean, we had balanced budget legislation years ago in British Columbia. So if they do things like have balanced budget legislation, tie their spending increases to things like inflation and population growth, and stop wasting money on dumb things. Like, for example, here in Alberta, they were this close to hosting the Commonwealth Games. And so we were going to spend about $2 billion hosting a 12-day table tennis tournament. Luckily, they scrapped that plan and we're saving that money. So all provincial governments should look carefully through their budgets and cut all of that nonsense waste.
Okay. You've given us some food for thought there. Thank you on that. When we come back, I do want to go to the next level of government. And that, of course, is cities. City Hall, what's it doing? Who's getting it right? Who's getting it wrong? We'll be back in a few minutes, just after the commercial break.